On Press Perspective today, we touch upon the upcoming APEC leaders meeting in Gyeongju, what this means for South Korea and for the rest of the world, especially as two big powers, the US and China, meet face-to-face amid the ongoing push and pull between the two. Do stay with us. Welcome to Thursday's edition of Press Perspective. I'm Kim Do-yeon, filling in for Min Sun-hee. Now, APEC 2025, Korea is just 2 weeks away. The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, comprises of 21 members economies from the Pacific Rim. Collectively, the APEC member economies represent a significant portion of the global economy, accounting for over 60% of the world's GDP. The forum serves as a prominent platform for promoting free trade and economic cooperation throughout the Asia-Pacific region. Now, South Korea is the host nation at a pivotal time. President Lee Jae Myung stepped into office just 4 months ago, and with the leaders of the two biggest powers set to attend, Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, the world will be tuning in to Gyeongju. Now, for more, we have two guests in the studio today. First, on my right, we have Thomas Maresca, a correspondent at UPI, here with us. Welcome.
Hi, thanks. Great to be here.
Now, we also have Yang Chen-hao, a journalist, with us here today on my left. Welcome.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So, Thomas, I would like to start with you. APEC is just around the corner, as I said. And as I mentioned, one key aspect is whether U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping will meet. Now, there's ongoing back and forth between them. What do you think? How do you see it unfolding?
Right. Well, it's been this kind of will they, won't they drama for the past, especially over the past week or so. I mean, they were widely expected to meet in the, leading up, but then a lot of uncertainty has come up really since this kind of on-again, off-again trade war appears to be heating up. I would say the very latest, at least coming from the U.S. side, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said yesterday that both sides have been in touch and are still working to set up the meeting. So kind of, I guess that sounds like they will probably meet. But, it basically started a week ago when China tightened some export controls on another batch of rare earth minerals, which, prompted Trump to respond on his Truth Social network, saying that he was going to impose an additional 100% tariff on China starting November 1st, which is actually right at that, APEC time. And he mentioned something about how he was supposed to meet President Xi, but now there seems no reason to do so. So then, there's kind of been this ongoing back and forth. On Monday, Bessent said that he believed the meeting would still happen. But then, Tuesday, there was a few more actions. China sanctioned some U.S. units of Hanwha Shipping, the Korean company, and Trump threatened to embargo Chinese cooking oil. So overall, it feels like it's this leverage kind of game leading up to it. And whether things will kind of stay stable enough for them to actually meet up, we'll still have to see. I mean, it sounds like there was some reporting, actually, in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, it was interesting, saying that China seems to think that, they have the upper hand, that Trump will blink because he's so concerned about the impact of this on the stock market of these trade wars. So they think they may be in a position to kind of have Trump, need to come to the table and perhaps concede some points. At the same time, there's some analysts have been saying that China is actually going too far with something like this rare earth mineral export control, because they're kind of not just taking on the U.S., but the rest of the world, and there could be some pushback from that. So, a lot of factors, but it seems like both sides are trying to kind of give themselves the advantage or the upper hand ahead of a meeting. Of course, Trump likes to be kind of the center of attention, likes a show. I mean, he's not so hot on kind of multilateral events in general, but I think, it sounds like South Korea has also said that it appears he's coming on the 29th, so it seems that like if he comes and she is here, that the opportunity is there for them to both meet. But again, it's still have to see. Yeah.
Right. And now I want to turn to you, Mr. Yang. If they're both here and President Lee Jae Myung is put to a test, right, as on a diplomatic stage, do you think there's like a bridge role that President Lee can play here? And what does that mean if he does?
I do believe President Lee Jae Myung will be eager to help facilitate the meeting between President Trump and Xi. If that were to happen successfully, it would certainly go down as a major historical achievement. But for now, South Korea itself faces its own set of challenge that need to be addressed first, particularly in its relationship with the United States. The two sides are still negotiating over tariff issues still ongoing, and the recent controversy in the state of Georgia, which hundreds of Korean workers, many of them are professional engineers, they're being detained, and it has raised tensions and affect the relationship between the United States and South Korea. And these unresolved issues remain delicate, so leaning too forward either to President Trump or to President Xi could spark domestic backlash, making any diplomatic balancing act extremely difficult. And as you know, President Lee Jae Myung has been in office for only 6 months till now. When it comes to the United States and China, the two superpowers, he's unlikely to take a hardline position. New presidents usually spend their early months building like a personal rapport or testing the waters with the other world leaders rather than making bold or risky moves. Unless South Korea can find strong leverage or incentives to push both Washington and Beijing, it seems most realistic path for now will be just emotional persuasion, mainly like encouraging the two powers to engage in dialogue through the APEC summit in Gyeongju.
Right, and I wanted to also touch upon another neighbor of South Korea, Japan. The prime minister role hasn't been confirmed, to say the least. The South Korean government will need to see the other variables, and we'll have to see who represents Japan at APEC. Most likely, it'll be Takaichi. But what are some alternatives, or are there any variables for South Korea when it comes to Japan?
Right. Yeah. This is another big kind of question mark. That's an unresolved issue. I mean, I would say I think the latest today seems that observers in Japan are feeling a little more confident that Takaichi will get confirmed as prime minister next week. There was the LDP, her party, met with the more conservative JIP, Japan Innovation Party, and they seemed to, it seemed indicating that they may be able to form a coalition, and then there only would be a couple of seats short of being able to form the government. So that's the latest. But even so, it's a very tight time frame for the next prime minister of Japan. This coming week, or 2 weeks ahead, not only APEC, but there's an ASEAN summit ahead of that, the 26th to 28th, and Trump is also supposed to visit Japan before APEC. So it's a lot of stuff in a row at this time when, even if Takaichi takes office, it's a lot to prepare for. As far as South Korea preparing, I think there's been a kind of, I'm sure there's been some gaming of these, flexible scenarios as to what could happen. I mean, there still is the possibility that if Takaichi does not take the prime minister office, they could send somebody as kind of an acting prime minister. They could send just kind of a caretaker government or like a delegation that's not, just a ministerial level delegation, or I guess there's still the off chance that just a different candidate could take the office. So, obviously South Korea has to kind of figure out how to respond to those different possibilities. And I think it's basically working level communication channels, maintaining openness, and then also trying to figure out, where will our focus be? I mean, maybe this uncertainty around Japan anyway kind of gives South Korea more of an impetus to focus on the U.S. or even some of the the ASEAN partners in terms of what their kind of more concrete diplomatic engagements would focus on. And obviously, if it is Takaichi, there's a whole host of questions that are going to come with that. I mean, I think she has said that she wants to maintain the détente sort of, or the closeness that Seoul and Tokyo have engaged in over the last couple of administrations. But she comes from a more hardline background. She's more aligned with former Prime Minister Abe, and so that could, some of those issues, some of the hardline nationalist issues, kind of have been the source of friction with Seoul in the past. So those are some questions that are also, I think, that South Korea is going to have to prepare for.
Right. You actually answered my follow-up question, which was, if Takaichi is confirmed, what does that mean? So we're going to move on to now relations with China. Mm-hmm. There has been some sort of anti-China protests around the streets in Korea, as you may well have heard. Does that play a variable to Xi's potential visit to APEC?
This is indeed a very complicated issue. Even if you see former President Yoon Suk-yeol, before he took office, he made a series of strong remarks about China. And once been elected, he clearly aligned himself more closely with the United States. While he's being careful not to openly provoke Beijing, and domestic politics have added new tension because after two consecutive defeats in the general election, 2020 and then 2024, the Democratic Party all gained the majority in the National Assembly. And far-right YouTubers and supporters, they began claiming that there had been election frauds and even suggesting that China was involved. And following last year's martial law crisis, President Yoon publicly repeated these unverified claims, which are widely viewed as conspiracy. And since then, anti-China rallies, this kind of demonstration, have started appearing very frequently on the streets of Seoul. From Beijing's perspective, this is clearly an unwelcome development. And President Xi Jinping is very likely to visit Gyeongju for the upcoming APEC summit, but the growing anti-China sentiment here could complicate that visit and further strain bilateral relations. As a journalist from Taiwan, I find this situation especially complex. People in Taiwan, we have long faced the pressure and threats from Beijing, and naturally, most of the people hold negative views or attitudes toward the Chinese government's actions. But during my coverage in South Korea, in Seoul, in this kind of anti-Chinese rally, I found it troubling that many protesters continue to insist on Chinese interference in the general elections without any real evidence. Over the past few years, indeed, there have been 126 related lawsuits against it, and every single one of them has been dismissed by the courts. So President Yoon himself had never mentioned these election frauds claims only until the martial law crisis erupted. And I've also personally covered the anti-China rallies. I can understand some people, they are really afraid of, I can understand their fear and resentment toward Beijing's influence. But what's striking is, as long as criticism of President Yoon come up, from any opponents, for example, those progressive supporters, it will be dismissed as being a red commies, so-called 발갱이 in Korean. That kind of rhetoric risks alienating moderate and progressive voters and may ironically make the public less concerned about China's real threats.
Right, and that was a very detailed answer. So I was going to ask you follow-up questions, but you also answered all of them. Now I'm going to turn to you. I wanted to mention, APEC members are different economies. That's why we don't say nations. We say economies. And China and Vietnam, respectively, will be hosting the next upcoming APEC annual events. This means Korea right now is going to be the last one of, democratic nation, sort of the ones that are aligning more with the Western nations. What does this mean, and where does APEC stand because of this?
Right. So as you said, I mean, this is the last APEC to be hosted by a democratic country for the next over these next few years. And I think in that context, this Gyeongju APEC is more than just an economic forum. It really becomes a kind of a showcase or an opportunity for South Korea to reaffirm the values of, democratic governance, open markets, rules-based trade, at a time when we're seeing challenges to that in the region. I mean, you mentioned China. Vietnam, is maybe not as firmly in this block of countries of, the sort of China, North Korea, Russia, but at the same time, Communist Party leader To Lam just was in North Korea at the 80th anniversary of the Workers' Party of Korea event. So, I think we are seeing that block in play. And, it gives Seoul kind of a diplomatic spotlight that I think, we saw Lee Jae Myung kind of espouse these values recently, at the UN General Assembly. I mean, he's definitely leaning into trying to, represent, for South Korea to represent democratic values in the world and to play sort of a bigger role on the global stage, as an avatar of these values and being involved in, more international, associations and groups and engagements. And so this, I think is seen as a chance to kind of to represent those values. And then, some of the other issues we were talking about, the uncertainty about where Japan is going to be showing up for this, and sort of the U.S. as well in a kind of a, unpredictable phase in terms of, just dealings with its allies and whether Trump's even going to show up, and Trump and Xi, whether they're going to meet. So in a sense, this also, it creates a kind of perhaps a sense of uncertainty or even chaos around it coming up. But at the same time, it also gives South Korea an opportunity to kind of take a leading role, even maybe more than it might have planned to, as far as representing the sort of the values of this liberal world order or democratic order that, South Korea has kind of put a stake in the ground and tried to represent. I mean, Lee Jae Myung has also really pointed to, as we were talking about in the last question, just the kind of the past events of martial law and, impeachment, and sort of trying to say that, South Korea represents the triumph of democracy and, the democratic system working. So I think that will become a key part of the platform for South Korea.
Right, and South Korea has a lot of businesses, global businesses working together, so it'd be an opportunity for them. Now, I want to kind of zoom out a little bit. Have you been to Gyeongju before?
Never, but will be in the end of this month.
What do you think about the big event happening there? I'm sure you looked into it before you're going.
Yeah,
right?
because it's once the capital of the ancient Silla Kingdom, and till now, as I know that you can barely saw like high-rise or tall buildings in the city, and it's also like home to countless historical treasures, including like Bulguksa and Punghwangsa and the Cheongsomdae Observatory. For many foreign visitors, it's long been the place to go to explore Korea's like history and cultural heritage beyond the capital area. And so South Korea has hosted numerous global events over the years, from the Asian Games before, and both Summer and Winter Olympic Games, and the World Cup football game. And 25 years ago, in 2005, the APEC summit was held in Busan. Now the government is bringing APEC to Gyeongju, aiming to showcase the country's capacity for both international cooperation and while also sharing its traditional culture with the world. And for decades, South Korea, we know that its development has been heavily concentrated in the capital region. So officials hope that the hosting APEC in Gyeongju will shine a brighter spotlight on other parts of the nation. And according to the Korean Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the event is expected to generate around $5.2 million US dollars in economic benefits for Gyeongju and nearby areas. That is going to be a significant boost to the local economy and its global visibility.
Right, and just to follow up, and we don't have much time, but lately, the K-pop demon hunters and the craze over culture, it comes at a perfect time, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think the tourism kind of to Gyeongju has been more driven by domestic travelers in the lead up to APEC. I think there was a big boom during the Chuseok holiday of people visiting there. And I think, it's more sort of on local people's radar as a tourism place. But I think, as the APEC summit is hosted, it will kind of be more on the international stage. And yeah, it totally aligns with this interest in tourism related to kind of cultural and heritage sites that K-pop Demon Hunters has really seen a huge boost in. I mean, the tourism in general, I think in Seoul, they said after the month after the movie first appeared, there was like a 23% increase in tourists to Seoul, and they're going to more museums, Bukchon, Hanok Village. There's this, growing interest in symbols of culture, the tiger and the magpie and things like that. So Gyeongju clearly fits that picture. I mean, there's such an Instagram kind of culture as well as visiting historical sites. So I think it makes perfect sense. We'll see if, it can capitalize on this interest.
Right, and I was there a couple weeks ago. Thoroughly enjoyed the visit. Fun fact, they have a really good roller coaster there. Mm-hmm. So I recommend you there.
I will be there too.
Yeah. Now, that concludes today's edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. Join us same time tomorrow. Goodbye.